Welcome to the dynamics of everyday life, where we demystify some tricky concepts and get to know ourselves a little bit better. Welcome back to the dynamics of everyday life. I'm sure the eagle-eared listeners amongst you will have recognised that I have new music. I'm very excited about this, as this music has been especially composed for me and my company. As well as rebranding and relaunching, I thought, let's have a music refresh, and I love it. It's got the James Bond vibe, although my daughter thought it sounded much more true crime than that. Anyway, that's just an additional note today. Our main topic concerns something that is very close to mine and my family's heart. Today I'm talking to another son parent, Del Parsons, about what it's like to be the parent of a child with autism. At the time of producing this episode, it's Autism Awareness Month, so it's the perfect time to share with everyone. Enjoy, and perhaps be challenged by our conversation. So welcome back to the show, everyone, and today I'm delighted to welcome Del Parsons to the show. Del is a business coach and marketing mentor for female founders of service-based businesses. Now, we could be talking about that, but actually we're going to be talking about something that impacts both of our lives quite significantly, and that's being a son parent. But Del, go for it. Introduce yourself to everyone.
Thank you so much. Yes, so my name's Del Parsons. I am predominantly known for being a business coach and marketing mentor for female founders of service-based businesses. So I had a career in marketing and selling for about 20 years before I set up my business. And that business was set up off the back of me being a parent and kind of coming to the realization, I guess, that you can't do everything. Like something has to give along the way. So the last 8 years has been a mammoth journey of, I don't know, all sorts of like fundamental things that I've learnt. And yeah, I am a parent of a 15-year-old son. I've only got one boy. He is an absolute joy and a delight. Like he's proper the love of my life. And one of the primary reasons for me leaving my proper job was because I had tried for a while to conceive him, and I'd had some miscarriages before I had had Thomas, and my career was always the thing that I had loved so much. And now this little person comes along and my world changed. So when Thomas was about 2 years old, maybe about 18 months, 2 years old, my first marriage broke down, partly because of the fact that I was so career focused. And now in hindsight, I kind of understand it. I was holding on so tightly to everything that I had in my life and trying to do everything, being a present mother, spending all of the time that I wanted to with my boy because I'd gone back 4 days a week, and keeping my marriage going, keeping a roof above our heads, doing all the things that we do as women. And it was blooming hard work. And then when Thomas started school, there were some kind of rumblings about, this might be showing up a little bit and that might be showing up. And we are now on a kind of pathway where he's 15, and the descriptions that the professionals like to say is that he has complex needs. So yes, it's been a journey.
Well, thank you for sharing. It's a journey that resonates with me, and the term complex needs is bandied around quite a lot, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I hate that description, so like when I'm speaking about it, I normally put it in inverted commas because it has this perception. So Thomas was diagnosed very early on, I guess, in terms of how long we had to wait and all those things, with autism spectrum disorder. And that kind of diagnosis, if you like, and going through the pathway and the waiting and the parenting classes that they try and send you on, and all of the rigmarole in terms of paperwork and progress measurements and all sorts of things that happens with that. that autism diagnosis was a real transformative moment for us because we kind of knew. Like we'd been on this pathway for so long, we'd been having conversations with lots of people, and the clinical psychologist kind of came up with this diagnosis, and I cried at the time. And it was a cry, not because I was like, oh no, it's terrible that my son's diagnosed in this way. It was a release of like, thank the Lord that somebody has listened to what we've said, and I'm not making this stuff up. So that was a massive relief. And Thomas must have been maybe 7 or 8, that sort of age when he was diagnosed. And we always said to him, like the minute we got back after that meeting with the clinical psychologist, we explained to him, like, you've got this thing called autism, and it just means that you do things differently to other people, perhaps in a really simple way. And that was it. And it's always been there. But it started this pathway for us in that, well, he's a bit, the way he holds his body is like a little bit different. And then actually, if we look at how he had developed his own strategies around self-soothing and self-regulation, perhaps there's a bit of sensory stuff going on there. And then perhaps this, something to do with how he's progressing at school. Maybe he's dyslexic. And if we screen for dyslexia, maybe there's some dyscalculia in there as well. And before you know it, there's like all of these labels of things that he's my boy. And that description, and when I read it on some of the paperwork in terms of like, Thomas is this kind of boy, that kind of boy, he presents with complex needs. And I was like, he's my son. He's not complicated. Like it was like dehumanizing him to some extent. And I found that quite challenging as a parent.
Because people think, oh, your life must be really difficult and this. And you're like, well, no, we just have to make some modifications. Do my children have a wide and varied diet? No, they really don't. But that's just the way that we roll in our
Yeah.
house. It is how it has to be.
Yeah. And actually, like for me, because I only had Thomas, like it didn't seem odd to me, because I'd spent some time after my first marriage broke down on my own with him. So, the way that we used to manage meltdowns and kind of very emotional situations was that we used to talk quietly about it. And I remember, bending down to him and saying, just look at me, and explaining it. But that's just the way I'd found that worked. And it seemed a little bit of an odd thing that they were then talking about, well, you need to do this and you need to do that. And I was like, well, he's not difficult when I have him one-on-one. Like, I don't have any issue communicating with him. He understands what I'm saying. I know him, he knows me. We get on fine. But the way it presented with Thomas was that in a school situation, in education, it was really, really difficult. And I remember quite early on, again, when he was on this kind of waiting list, was that school were obviously trying all of these strategies about what would work and what, things that we could try. And one of the things that they suggested was a homeschool diary. Great, in theory, that sounds perfect, right? But this homeschool diary was coming back with things like, he's pushed in the dinner queue today. So there was a sad face on there. And I'd be saying, why did you push in the dinner queue? Because you know that you have to wait. I wasn't pushing. And he would be adamant that he wasn't pushing in the dinner queue. And I'm like, well, what happened? Well, I'd remembered this thing and I wanted to tell such and such a body this thing that I'd remembered, but he was like 5 boys behind me in the queue. So I'd gone to tell him and then went back to my place in the queue. I was like, well, that's perfectly reasonable for a 6 or 7-year-old to explain it in that way. I was like, why are they putting a real sad face on there? And I would really struggle because he was seen as this kid that was naughty, if you like. Yeah. So he would get overwhelmed in a classroom situation. He would very, very frequently run out of class, huge meltdown situation. And then because he was so young, he didn't have a huge amount of strategies in his toolkit, bless him, where he could self-regulate. That was his way to regulate, escape from the situation. But then that was like a big issue for school, you know, in terms of like, well, he's run out of school again and he's disturbed all the other children. And it was like this massive thing about understanding him as an individual was missing for
Mm.
many, many years. And that's the bit that I struggle with, is that the label, like the complex needs label or the ASD label or the dyslexia label, is like people make such huge and sweeping generalizations and assumptions about what they believe it is and what they believe it isn't. And I think that is a really dangerous place to be.
I could not agree more. I will often have comments like, well, he couldn't possibly be autistic because he shows his or he understands other people's emotions. If somebody else is upset, he'll go and comfort them. So he couldn't possibly be autistic. I suspect the psychiatrist, the paediatrician who diagnosed him, possibly knows what they're doing.
Yeah. And I think, you know, in terms of assumptions around some of those, I hate the term disorder, but like, you know, somebody who presents as or with some neurodiversity, it's such a huge spectrum. In Thomas's situation, like he makes friends really easily, he's very charming and articulate, he understands other people's emotions, like you say. But if something doesn't feel right, like even now at 15, he'll need to wear his socks inside out. And, you know, because of the way it feels for him is weird, and it sets him off on a pathway that he's not calm enough inside. Or like if we go somewhere, like he went to his first concert last year, we took him to a concert, which is massively overwhelming, right? So again, we developed ways over the years of explaining that we'll go and explaining where we'll be sitting and explaining the fact that he might get searched on the way in, all of those kind of things. But one of the things that I'd missed was about, you know, when you're in a concert and you're sat there or you're standing there and it's loud, we know it's going to be loud, right? So I've said that to him, it's going to be loud. Okay. But the thing that he remembers really significantly from that concert was about the vibration of the music in his body. I was like, oh, yeah. Like, so that's something for him. Like, I would have never picked up on that. But now that he'd said it, I was like, of course you feel the vibration in your body. And he's going to, right? If he's got some sensory sensitivities around things, things like that. Or like, you know, now he travels really well with us. So we are really lucky that we travel quite a lot, and he's brilliant. You know, he knows the drill at an airport, he knows the way that that system works, and he can manage himself through security and all of that stuff. But he couldn't get on a train to go from where we live into Manchester, for example. He wouldn't know, he can't navigate that. And I think because it's so diverse in terms of the way it presents, the assumptions about what's happened with one child that has some neurodiversity in this environment at this school, that doesn't lift and template onto another kid. And I get the whole fact that, you know, there's not enough resource to support them and budgets are cut. I get that. But there is a human to human element on things. And I think many, many occasions that's missed because the label presents itself first, and that makes me sad.
I could not agree more. In some ways, the label is helpful because it automatically signposts to school that you need to do something to support this child. But we found, and I don't know if this is the same in your situation, that without the educational healthcare plan, the EHCP, he got put into the kind of like lesser needs when he transitioned to secondary school. And so we had a horrific time because
Yeah.
because they couldn't see they couldn't see the child who was turning up at school. All they saw was, well, he doesn't have an EHCP, so he doesn't need this level of support, despite the fact that he was so clearly struggling. We were doing things like ending up at A&E in the middle of the night because he was so stressed.
Yeah. And it's horrible as a parent. But I think, along the way, we've learned so much. And one of the best pieces of advice that somebody gave me, and I can't remember who told me, but they were like, you know your kid. And, you know, it's really easy to get swept up. And you and I both know you've got to fight for this stuff because resources are tough and budgets are cut. And of course, I understand that that is there. But when the professionals are saying, and I'm not professional bashing, just to make that clear, but they've got a job to do too, right? They see our children for an hour or for 30 minutes or a description on a piece of paper or a form that's filled in. We live and breathe life with our children. And I think as a parent, this inner knowing that you have, yeah, we talk about it as a gut feel in many areas of our lives, don't we? Particularly
Mm.
for women, I think, yeah. Intuitively, I know that something is off with him. Don't know what it is. And it's the same if I flip back to when he was little. So we went through a period, he was probably, I don't know, like older toddler, 3, 4. And he used to have really bad night terrors. And I knew, like, I'd wake up before he would wake up with these night terrors. And I don't know why, I don't know what it was, but it was just there, like I knew something. And it's like taking that intuition and bringing it with you on this journey because you know what's right for your child. Because I was talking to somebody about it only yesterday, and there's some challenges with her child, and I was saying, like, the thing is that when it comes to understanding your child and knowing what works and doesn't work with your child, you feel that one, you're not being listened to, secondly, that you're perhaps a little bit emotional, that there's nothing really wrong with your child. But again, that's just the way they are. Like he's mine, and that he that's him as a whole person. And I find it's a weird thing. You have to be prepared to fight for it, but trust your instincts massively. I fought against people sending me to parenting classes. So, like, as part of the process up here where we live up in Lancashire, when we start this process of a CAF and a TAF or whatever the forms are called, they're like, you need to go to parenting classes. I was like, I'm not going. I'm not going. And maybe, there's an argument for and against. But I was like, I felt at the time that it was telling me how to parent my son. And that immediately gets my back up. But if we come back to the principle around he's another human, he's trying to tell me something. And I notice it now, like little things that he struggles with now that perhaps other people wouldn't pick up on because he's in this pathway of, like, he's a child and he does this and he's labeled in this way, or he's setted at school in this particular set. Like, much like you, we've had a horrific time with schools and stuff, and it shouldn't be like that. And I think I always say to him now, right? So he's 15 and he's like at this cusp in year 11 of moving on to like a different phase of his life. And perhaps some of it is how he's growing up. So Craig and I are both business owners. We're quite an entrepreneurial family. We've got lots of stuff going on. Because he's our only child, he hears a lot of adult conversations in, like, about the business and about what we're doing and about conversations we've had. He's very much around his own pathway. So he doesn't really think about how it looks to his pals. He's not right bothered about what people think, as long as it's okay for him. And I believe this in my bones. Like, I can feel it somewhere, and I've got nothing to prove it, but I feel it. That at some point in his future, he will be able to tell his story to other kids that are struggling in the most beautiful, articulate way. And that he will be a person that inspires other kids who have exactly the same struggle. And he'll say things like, I'm not I'm not book clever, but I'm smart. And that, as a characteristic in terms of what the world needs moving forward, I have this again in the knowing that that will be his thing. Don't know when, but it will come out because he's been through so much of this palaver with things. You start layering it up. He's done really well to get to where he is now.
It's funny, isn't it, that we see a lot of children with additional needs as being disadvantaged, but when you think actually they have incredible resilience to be in mainstream school. I mean, I walk into my son's school now, I'm overwhelmed. It's so big. There are so many people walking around. I'm like, I couldn't do this. No wonder he has, one day every half term where
Yeah,
he comes home and goes to bed.
yeah, yeah,
It's incredible. And when you think about the challenges that they have to function in a world that isn't set out for them, it's phenomenal. It's
yeah.
inspirational.
Totally that. And I this might be a little bit controversial. So I know, like when I was a kid, okay, so I'm 50 this year, so that just puts it in context. When I was at school, there was no talk about autism or Asperger's. There was some talk of dyslexia, but that was very much seen as they have problems with reading and writing. Yeah. Not none of the other stuff that comes with it in terms of how they organize, how they self-regulate, all of the visual things, working memory challenges, all of that stuff. None of that was there. Whereas now, it very much seems that, and it's a good thing, don't get me wrong, it's a good thing that we're talking about differences and how different people see the world and how the world is built for some and not for others. I get that. But there is a lot of talk about like self-diagnosed neurodiversity. And okay, I get the fact that waiting lists are long and it's expensive if you go private, all of that stuff. And there may be many, many people that have some autistic traits because it is a spectrum. Okay. And like that's my experience. I don't have any experience with ADHD, for example. Because it's a spectrum and it can vary so greatly in terms of how it presents for people that have had a diagnosis through a professional. It's like we're noticing this superpower that they have, and people want a bit of it. And I might be slated for saying what I've just said, right? But I fought so damn hard for Thomas to have that diagnosis. And I'm not going back that long, it's less than 10 years. It's a spectrum because of the nature of what it is. And there is a triad. There are three elements that have to be presenting. There may be people like me, like you, like whoever, that presents quite significantly with social and emotional challenges, let's say. Okay. But none of the other things are there. That doesn't make them autistic. And I think it's a very difficult line for us to draw. And this whole labeling thing, again, becomes an issue for me. Because if we start treating humans and thinking about them and speaking to them as individuals, you can't go far wrong, right? It's a very difficult thing to, because I know people struggle with getting a diagnosis, but the diagnosis itself, it it's a really difficult line for me to try and navigate. And I'd love to have a conversation with parents or people that have some level of neurodiversity that have not had a diagnosis. In that instance, it's finding things and strategies that work for you as a human, right? Rather than trying and wanting to label it as a thing. It's seen as like something quite special and quite unique. And there's talk now about all of the, like dyslexic thinking is a big thing, right? A big movement in terms of the way in which dyslexics think and process and approach tasks. They can bring a whole load of value to it. Yeah, I struggle with the whole conversation about that.
Excuse me, it's a really interesting thing because One of the things that I find incredibly challenging is when people say, oh, we're all a little bit on the spectrum.
Yeah.
No, no, we're really not. Yes, there is a spectrum because the people who are diagnosed present with such different aspects of it. But no, we are not all a little bit on the spectrum. And actually, you saying that absolutely is incredibly disrespectful to the challenges that he goes through each day
Mm,
because it's not the
yeah.
same.
Yeah.
It's not the same.
Or like comments like, oh, it's a bit spectrumy, isn't it? I'm like, all right. But again, this is the understanding of, you know, again, at a human level, like some people, like we're wired differently, we look different, like it's okay. It's okay. We don't always have to label it as something. I'm glad in hindsight we do have a label for him because it's allowed us to get an EHCP, although we've had to fight for it, and that's a different story. But it it's been it it gives me an opportunity to have the conversation, I think is
Mm,
what it does, rather than being dismissed. Because I've got a bit of paper that
mm.
tells me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we have a very different relationship to school now. It was a
Yeah.
long fight to get him an EHCP, but it was almost like once I'd got this bit of paper, all these things were offered to him that had never been offered before. And
Mm.
there's so much understanding and support for him. They're like, yeah, okay, if he needs to go home and have a sleep for 24 hours, we know that that's what he needs. And
Yeah.
I'm like, but beforehand, I was virtually being dragged off to the cells because he wasn't turning up at school. And
Yeah.
now, because we have this bit of paper, it's okay, which is actually what he needs. But it is, I think it's a very complicated world for a parent to be in, and I would never change him. When we got the diagnosis, I remember one of the things, because we were very open with him, and he said, I just want to throw it out of the window. And I was like, oh, and yet I don't want it to change him. I wouldn't take the autism away because that would mean I
Yeah.
couldn't have my son the way that he is, and I wouldn't change him for the world.
Yeah. And I think, it's it's when you're on that journey and you speak to other parents who are experiencing a similar thing, I think I'm really grateful that he was diagnosed at an age that allowed us to put things in place. So I'm hugely, hugely grateful for that. I'm hugely grateful for having an EHC because of the conversation it allows me to have with people. And like you, we've had a massive issue with school, like all of the time. We've been through exclusions, we've been through bullying periods, just like really horrible stuff. And we've moved schools, and he moved at the end of year 7. And we made a choice to move him to an independent school because it was a smaller environment, less people. The school itself is in an old house, basically, so it feels very homely. And that I remember them saying to me, we're not sure if we can help him or not. Half of the teachers think that we can, and half of them think that we can't, that he's not right. And they made a decision. The head overruled them and said, come, we'll try. And he's in year 11 now, and he has absolutely flourished because they treat him as him. He's not just another kid in year 11. He's got his own personality. They treat him as him, and they notice little things about him. So one of the things that happened over the last couple of weeks was that somebody from school has rang me to say, can we have a catch up? And the reason they wanted a catch up was that he was off, is how they described it. He's not quite himself. Little things like he didn't want to partake in like lunchtime classes, or he would walk around with his shirt a little bit untucked, and like he was a bit more just not involved, or like more forgetful than he's always been. Just little things like that. And they were like, we're noticing this little change in him. And I don't think he has the words to be able to explain it necessarily in the way that I would, but he feels so under pressure because he's in year 11, he's got GCSEs coming up. He feels overwhelmed, but overwhelm is something that he dealt with when he was little in a meltdown situation. And that was overwhelmed very much from a sensory overload. But what he's feeling now is overwhelmed from everybody putting pressure on him. It's a different thing. And I don't think he knows quite how to handle it. So it's presenting with him in a way that is he's becoming withdrawn in himself. Whereas normally he's quite vibrant and quite chatty and like wants to do things. So that little change in him that school noticed because they're treating him as him was like
Mm.
amazing. But it's
Yeah,
tough.
but then you can do something about it, can't you? You're
Yeah,
like, right, okay, let's
yeah,
start the conversation.
yeah. And I think, one of the other reasons, like I said before, I gave up my proper job and it was a lovely job. I was on a great salary and all of these things. Not in its entirety was kind of Thomas wasn't the entire reason that I gave that up. But I remember the anxiousness that came with trying to hold down a job and, a really responsible job in a senior level, and the anxiety with, is nursery going to call me? Is school going to call me? And I
Mm.
was so on edge all of the time, just like unconsciously worrying about it. That something will have happened, or school will be ringing me to say, oh, there's been another incident, and those kind of things. I never get those phone calls now. Never. Although I did last week. The week last week or the week before, I was at an event and I saw the school phone number flash on my phone. I was like, ooh, feeling the anxiety creep up in my body. And it was, and again, like the school's brilliant. And they were like, we're just ringing about Thomas. I was like, right, waiting for there's been an incident conversation. Well, he's saying that he wants to do DV Silver. Is that okay with you if he does DV Silver? I was like, oh God, thank goodness for that. Yes, yes, that's fine. But it kind of brings back some of that, I guess, trauma as a parent, if you want to say that, because it was really stressful, and I would worry what I was doing, what I was not doing. Could I do more? Should I be doing less? Should I be letting him fail or preventing him fail? Like, because people say to you they've got to learn their own way and they've got to find their own feet.
Or with the food, well, they'll just have to sit there and eat the dinner until they eat it.
Uh,
No, because he'll start to make himself sick on it.
yeah.
Oh, Danny ended up on the borderline of being malnourished in infants because I'd asked them to keep an eye on what he was eating. They didn't tell me he was eating nothing. And after 4 weeks, he was falling asleep and coming home covered in bruises. So I had all these kind of panics.
Yeah.
And it turned out they just weren't keeping an eye on what he was eating.
I know. And it's like, it's really simple things. And I think, a guiding principle in life is just treat people as you want to be treated, as humans. Like, and I think with neurodiverse child, that advice hasn't sent me far wrong.
No, you're right. And also the what you mentioned earlier, you know, fight for your child, advocate for your child, because if you don't advocate for them, who else is going to?
Yeah. And it comes back like full circle each time, like to this inner knowing and this intuitive way of parenting. And like, even from when you're pregnant and when you give birth to your new baby, well, he should be doing this, especially if it's the first one, like you should be doing this and you should be doing that. And, bless my mum came to stay with me for a fortnight when I had Thomas, and you should be doing it this way and you should be doing it that way. And yeah, you need some of that guidance, of course you do. But you know.
Mm. And it's being able to recognize that knowing, because I think with Danny, I kind of knew, but I Yeah, my first child, very bright, very articulate, a girl, did everything herself. And to be honest, I think my defences were up, and I was like, well, he's a boy. And this is clearly what happens with your second child, and they're a boy and they're dragged round after everything. It was only when actually an infant school teacher went, and we'd gone to sports day. You'd have thought, I used to work in mental health services with an autism charity as well. He lay down in the middle of a running race and put his hands over his ears. And I thought he was brewing up a sickness bug. And it was only later on that day that and I went to pick him up, bouncing off the walls, he was fine. And it was only that day that the infant's reception teacher went, I need to have a word with you because I think he has autism. And it was then like everything fell into place. But like you said, I'd kind of known, but I don't think I'd wanted to know. So I'd buried it all away and thought, well, there's some stuff there, but he's a boy, it'll be fine.
I think you do, because like they're just them. That's the way they are, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, Dad, I could talk to you about this all day. But
I'm such an advocate of it, and I think there's like the story I told you about. I think in future he will be on a stage somewhere, like communicating like what's possible, because he's got enough about him and enough charm, and he can turn it on when he needs to, in terms of like adding a bit of sparkle to things. I know he's my boy, but I feel like he's got the potential to change the world.
Oh, well, I just think that's such a perfect place to finish our conversation. How can people, if people would like to talk to you about anything, either autism related or anything else like that, how do people get in touch with you?
I'm very easy to find. On the internet. So I'm on Instagram as Del Parsons Coaching. I am on LinkedIn as Del Parsons, and I'm on Facebook as Del Parsons as well. So I'm happy to have conversations, and I talk a lot about the journey that we've been on, and each time I do, I have people moving towards me to say, we're on this journey with our child, or like, I've just had a diagnosis for my child, or I think my child is this or is that. So I am more than happy to have conversation. I am no expert. I just have lived experience of going through it, and the things that worked for us, and distilling it down to that, like that, it's the best advice that I could have ever wished to have. And I am so grateful. And it's a privilege being a parent to a child that has that magic about them. I think we're very gifted to be able to share that pathway with them.
You're right. And it's so important to be able to talk about it, because it can feel quite lonely to start with. And you can, just from my perception, you can feel, have I done something wrong? Did I wait and have children too late? Did I, all these kind of things go through your head, and then you think, you know what? I'm actually really glad I did. I wouldn't want any other child, or children apart from the ones that I've got.
Yeah. It's a beautiful privilege. So I'm grateful.
Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing your story, Del. I will make sure all your bits and pieces go in the show notes, and I'm sure we'd love to have you on another day as well to talk about all the other wonderful things.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure, Del. Talk to you soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Dynamics of Everyday Life. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. As well as producing this podcast, The Dynamics of Everyday Life has lots more psychodynamic fun going on, and you can find out more at dynamicsofeveryday.life.